Hello, I'm Oliver Colling, and this is my 70s TV childhood. Welcome back to my 70s TV childhood. We are a podcast which looks back with unashamed nostalgia to what it was like to grow up as a child in 1970s Britain. As you might have already guessed from our title if you're listening for the first time, we have particularly fond memories of watching television and the programmes which bound us together, not only as small children, but as a society. Let's face it, things were a bit tough for many people in the UK at that time, and television provided an opportunity for us to sit together as families, and for us to have common reference points for our conversations at school and in the workplace. But we were children enjoying our childhood, and, do you know, I think we were lucky to do so at such a special time. Now, as always, thank you to all listeners who've been in touch with me via our blog at www.my70stvchildhood.com, or on our social media pages, or by email to oliver@my70stvchildhood.com. I do enjoy hearing from listeners who share their memories and thoughts with me, and I have been truly moved by how many of you take the time to contact us. It really does make the effort in putting the podcast together worthwhile. Now, I do have to apologise that I am a little behind in responding to everything in my bulging digital postbag, and the truth is, I have been quite busy with my day job, and have not had as much time as normal. Now, unlikely as it seems, producing this podcast doesn't pay the rent, so sometimes real life can get in the way. So if you've been in touch recently and I haven't got back to you yet, many apologies. I will do soon. At the time of recording, Christmas is a few months behind us, but in our house we still have a few remnants of chocolate hanging around, together with the odd present still searching for a home. I seem to remember that always being the case as a child. The unopened box of dates which had been sitting on the sideboard had finally been thrown away. Were we the only family in Britain who did that? My parents always said we had to have some dates in for Christmas, in case somebody visited and wanted one. And, to the best of my memory, nobody ever did. And the other thing which used to stay around for a few months were the annuals that I and my sister got for Christmas. I used to love getting those books, the annuals, and I would read them from cover to cover, often getting to know the stories and features almost off by heart. Which annuals did you get? There was always a huge choice, and it was always difficult to narrow down which annuals would make it onto my Christmas list. There were annuals for all the comics I used to read, and those changed over the years as I got older and my choice of comic changed accordingly. So the early days of Teddy Bear Weekly Annual were pretty soon replaced by the Donald and Mickey Annual, and in turn the Donald and Mickey Annual were replaced by the Shoot Annual as my childhood obsession with football developed. There were also annuals relating to popular TV shows, and not just children's shows. I remember having annuals for the likes of Dad's Army, Space 1999, and even The Professionals, which wasn't necessarily a sound choice for children. I do remember that one of my friends even had the Sweeney Annual, which was, well, quite frankly, an even more unlikely subject for an annual than any of the others. But as much as the subject of annuals changed depending on how old you were, and what TV shows were popular, there were some hardy perennials which appeared in my stocking every year. There was the Blue Peter book, nothing so common as an annual for the BBC's flagship kids show, which detailed the exploits of the team over the year and gave you lots of helpful instructions on how to make some of the things that had been featured on the programme. Assuming, that is, you had plenty of sticky back plastic to hand, of course. The other annual, which appeared every year, was one featuring a charming little bear, who lived in the village of Nutwood, with his parents, and who had lots of adventures with a whole host of his friends. What was remarkable about this little bear was the fact that he had been around for decades, and my parents also had happy memories of reading about his adventures. How could this be possible? Parents, when you're a child, seem very, very old, and it was very hard to imagine them as ever being children themselves. Who was this long-lived little bear? Well, even if you didn't get the annuals, you'd probably remember the TV adaptation of his adventures, which was regularly shown on ITV during the 1970s, and had, I have to say, a very catchy theme tune.
Today, Rupert finds an unusual traveling machine and takes off in Rupert and the Unknown. There's a little bear like you've never seen before, who's a lot of fun. Children everywhere grow to love him more and more. He's the number one. There's a million stories to be told of the things that he's done, and he's gonna share them all with you, so come along. Rupert, Rupert the Bear, everyone sing his name. Rupert, Rupert the Bear, everyone come and join in all of his games.
The Adventures of Rupert Bear was shown on ITV over 4 series, with a remarkable 135 episodes being produced. Now, before we look at Rupert in a bit more detail, let's deal with the legacy of that theme tune. It was sung by Jackie Lee and was a minor hit, reaching number 14 in the UK singles chart in 1971. Now, it may sound like I'm being pedantic, but it has caused a whole generation to think that the main character of the show was called Rupert the Bear. No, the word "the" was inserted to make the song scan, and the main character is simply, and always has been, Rupert Bear, as all of us who read the annual knew. Oof. Well, I'm glad that I've got that off my chest and sorted out. But going back to my parents, how could they have possibly had Rupert during their childhood? Let's take a quick look at Rupert's origins. Rupert was created by the artist Mary Turtle for a cartoon strip in the Daily Express, and first appeared in November 1920 as the Little Lost Bear, who eventually became Rupert. He was introduced by the Daily Express in an attempt to win readers from its rival, the Daily Mail, and it certainly worked, to the extent that the Little Bear has been a permanent fixture in the newspaper ever since. Rupert started off as a brown bear, but quickly gained his familiar white coat as the printers wanted to save ink, apparently. In 1935, Alfred Bestall took over drawing the cartoon strip and made some adjustments to the strip, which brought us the Rupert we have known and loved since, with his jolly yellow check trousers and red jumper, with a yellow check scarf to match those yellow trousers. The strip was hugely popular, and in 1936 the first Rupert Annual was produced. Think of that, 1936. My parents were born in 1930, so it would have been perfect reading for them. And I do remember my father telling me that he and his brothers used to wait for the newspaper to be delivered so they could catch up on Rupert's adventures as soon as they could. Inevitably, the enduring popularity of Rupert in the Daily Express led to him being on TV. And The Adventures of Rupert Bear was first shown on ITV in October 1970. Every episode started off with a live action sequence showing a mother putting her child to bed and reading the child a bedtime story about, well, you can guess, Rupert. That then led into the famous opening theme tune and a sequence where all of the regular characters appeared on screen, setting the scene for more adventures. The show wasn't a cartoon itself, but was, well, a puppet show, and the stories were acted out across some lovely scenery, not only in Nutwood, but in lots of exotic locations worldwide. I think that Mr. and Mrs. Bear, Rupert's parents, were quite liberal parents, as Rupert and his friends seemed to disappear for days at a time in flying chariots or on sailing ships or other exciting modes of transport. What I always liked and still do like about Rupert is that he is so polite, positive, and generally lively. He's always befriending lonely people like Raggety, the wood sprite, who I always thought looked just like a turnip, and Tiger Lilly, a young Chinese girl, who provided a gateway to lots of adventures together with her father. I seem to remember there are a lot of Asiatic characters and storylines, which always seemed very exotic to me, sat watching the television in northwest England. And of course, Rupert, being a very friendly type of bear, had lots of friends. How many of his friends do you remember? Oh, and before I go on about his friends, Rupert in the TV show wasn't white. He was a sort of yellowy colour from memory. But I suppose when you're a bear who flies around in a chariot and has so many friends, why should that be a problem? We've already mentioned Mr. and Mrs. Bear, who as well as being reasonably liberal, did seem to reinforce sexual stereotypes in Nutwood, with Mr. Bear always seemingly tinkering in the garden, or mowing the lawn, or trimming the hedge, or being in his shed, and Mrs. Bear invariably cleaning and cooking and producing huge spreads for Rupert and whichever of his old or new friends he brought round to the house for tea. Rupert's best friend was Bill Badger, who was, not surprisingly, a badger. Bill often went with Rupert in his flying chariot, and was another generally good thing. There was nothing other than good in him, and he was a great friend to Rupert. Actually, thinking about it, his parents, the very imaginatively named Mr. and Mrs. Badger, were pretty liberal too. You imagine the conversations. "So, Bill, where have you and Rupert been today?" "Well, Mum, we've been flown to China and befriended some lonely children whilst helping free a princess who was being held captive by the Chinese emperor." "Oh, yes, dear," said Mrs. Badger. "Come and have some Victoria sponge cake and tea." Other friends included Edward Trunk, who was a little elephant, who was, I seem to remember, blue. Or I might be making that up. And he wore an old-fashioned school blazer and cap. Then there was Margot, I think, who was the closest thing that Rupert had to a girlfriend. Podgy Pig, who confirmed more stereotypes both about eating, being large, and about pigs. And PC Growler, who was, I can't remember what animal he was. A dog, perhaps? He was the friendly but stern policeman who kept law and order in Nutwood. I seem to remember that as the TV show went on, that more and more characters were introduced. Now, I do get a bit confused as to who was in the TV show and who was in the comic strips and who was in both. Quite possibly, everybody who was on the TV show was in the comic strip, but I'm not sure. There were several episodes featuring Jack Frost, for example, who was originally quite sinister and a bit of a villain, but as usually happened, was befriended by Rupert and turned out to be all right in the end. I also remember Santa Claus made many Christmas-related appearances, and there were lots of Oriental characters. We mentioned Tiger Lilly, so we should also mention her father, who was I seem to remember, a mysterious magician. And we also had lots of stories featuring Chinese dragons, which I always found very exciting, particularly as they talked. But after all of these increasingly strange characters, we always ended up back in Nutwood for a lavish tea laid on by Mrs. Bear in the Bear's cottage. I have to say that I can't remember many of the storylines from the 135 episodes, but I do remember some of the characters, as we've just said, and that's also true for the set of Rupert annuals that sit on one of my bookshelves. What always comes through in all of these stories is how jolly and utterly positive Rupert remains. He is polite, kind, always helpful, and I think we all loved him for that. After the TV show ended in 1974, it was regularly repeated for the next few years, and remained popular with a new generation of viewers, not least for its memorable theme tune. But the original show has not been repeated on mainstream channels since 1981, and I wonder why that is. The original comic strip has come in for some revisionist criticism over the years for its depiction of foreigners, and black Africans in particular. But I think hindsight can be a wonderful thing. And let's not forget the world was a very different place when Mary Turtle created the famous bear, and modern attitudes are very different. And from what I remember, Rupert was always very welcoming of everyone he met, no matter what they looked like. So I don't know why it's not been shown for so long, but I, and I'm sure many of you, remember it fondly, even if we can't remember any of the plot lines. Rupert has had several incarnations on screen since, most notably with Paul McCartney in the quite charming video for the Frog Chorus, the Christmas #1 hit. I have heard that more recent cartoon versions have transplanted Nutwood from England to North America, which doesn't feel quite right to me, in the same way that, apparently, Thomas the Tank Engine is now set in America too. Or perhaps I'm just turning into a grumpy old man. No comments on that one, please. Rupert's goodness has shone through for over 100 years now, and I, for one, still smile when I see his charming smiling face. I hope you do too.
There's a little bear like you've never seen before, who's a lot of fun. Children everywhere grow to love him more and more. He's the number one. There's a million stories to be told of the things that he's done, and
That's about all we have time for in this episode. If you have special memories of Rupert's adventures, then why don't you let me know on our blog at www.my70stvchildhood.com or email me, oliver@my70stvchildhood.com. You can also get in touch via one of our many and varied social media sites. So, take care. Be inspired by Rupert to say hello to someone new today, and above all, to be kind to everyone you meet. Join us again next week for the next instalment of our quiz, and in a fortnight for the next episode of the podcast. Don't forget to like, rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts, and look forward to you joining us again soon for more from My 70s TV Childhood.